Everybody, good to see you. This week's Torah portion is found in the book of Genesis chapter 32, and it's called Vayishalach. We actually have a couple of other Torah portions with similar names, such as in the book of Exodus, we have one called Vayishalach, when Pharaoh sent out the people, and we have another one in the book of Numbers called Shalach or Shalach Lakah, when Moses sent out the 12 delegates or spies to search out the land of Canaan. And in this one, it begins in chapter 32, verse 4, in my translation. Then Jacob sent angels ahead of him to Esau, his brother, to the land of Seir, the field of Edom. We talked about Seir and Edom a little bit last time. Now, the word for angels is malakim, and it's also the word for that can be just talking about human messengers or divine messengers. And my translation here opts for translating that as angels. And as we continue on here, he is basically, Jacob has gotten away from Laban, and now he is he's about to face Esau. And these messengers come back with word, and they say that Esau is coming towards you with 400 men, an army, and he's not happy. He's still ticked off from the last time that you guys saw each other, when you had taken his birthright and then taken the blessing from him. And so kind of, all of these years later, here we go, and it says he charged them, that is Jacob charged these messengers, saying, basically go to Esau, and he's trying to appease him. Several things are going on here. We talked about the other evening that Jacob doesn't just have one strategy that he's putting all of his hopes and into. I think a lot of people, certain religious people nowadays, would look at the decisions that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, other people make and criticize. If something similar was done nowadays, they would say, well, Jacob should trust God more, not rely on his own self. Well, he does the first thing that Jacob does when he finds out that Esau is coming toward him with these 400 men is he divides his camp up. He divides the camp into all of his people, which is significant on a prophetic level, and many other levels. This is the way of things, is that things divide, and then they, ideally, in order to produce and expand, whether you're talking about the woman, Eve, Chava, being taken from Adam, the two becoming one and then coming together again as a unity, or whether you're talking about the houses of Israel dividing into the northern house, the house of Israel, and the southern house, the house of Judah, which I believe this foreshadows and brings about by this precedent here. And so Jacob sends these messengers, whether you believe that they are divine, and angels is the proper translation, or just human messengers. I won't really go into that right now, but you can determine what you think it is. It says that they said, we came to your brother, to Esau, moreover he is heading towards you, and 400 men are with him. And I think I last time talked a little bit about when you see a concept, whether it's a letter or a word or some concept, something happen, it's a good idea to say, well, when was the first time that this thing was mentioned, or what are the other times that something in other passages relates to this. And as you ask those questions, you begin to ask, seek, and knock. A lot of times these dots will begin to connect for you. And so already in Genesis, I can think of, I believe it's in, is it in Genesis, not Genesis 15, maybe Genesis 13, the covenant of the pieces. I can't remember right offhand. But Abraham has this dream, and God speaks to him in this dream, and he says that basically that your seed will be oppressed for 400 years. And so that number 400 is used there. A little bit later on, in the Torah portion, Yetzer Hara, the life of Sarah, Abraham negotiates for a burial plot for Sarah from the guy named Ephron the Hittite that we discussed, for 400 shekels. So, and now there's 400 men that are intent on destroying Jacob. So this number 400 doesn't bode well many times for the people of God, but they nevertheless are overcoming this. Similar to the number 4 and the number 40 as well. If you see, or the number 770, 700, 7,000, there's going to be similar characteristics, symbolism, and traits with numbers like that. And so they give him the report there of what's going on. And so Jacob divides the camps in two. And he says, because if Esau comes and strikes one of them, then maybe the other one will survive. And then he begins to pray earnestly to God and remind God of his promises, which is a good thing to do. Good thing to do, to remind God of his promises and say, I believe you, and you promised me that, and I'm asking you to fulfill your word here. And so the first thing that Jacob does, is prepare for battle. Divides the troops, divides his people up into, and he prepares for war. Then he prays, and he reminds God of his promises, and puts his trust in God. Then he does everything he can to appease, and he sends tribute to Esau through these messengers and through these droves to try to avoid war and conflict. And so he doesn't just put all of his eggs in one basket. He does several things to try to get through this situation here, because Esau wants to kill him. And so we go on here in the story, and I'm not going to dwell on that too much. I'd like to focus upon, there's a pause in this place, in this section here. So he's preparing, and then he sends all of his family and all of his possessions, the herds and the flocks, over the river. Let me back up here. And it says that in verse 23, but he caught up that night, and he took his 2 wives, his 2 handmaids, and his 11 sons, because Benjamin hasn't been born yet, and he crossed the ford of the Jabbok. And when he had took them and had them cross over the stream, he sent over his possessions. And so that's a pretty neat deal symbolically to look at sometime, of this idea of crossing over rivers like the Jordan, very significant at times, or even in history with crossing the Rubicon. It's like the whole destiny changes by this idea of crossing over. And by the way, that's the word Hebrew. In Ivri, that's what it means, one who has crossed over. And so that has lots of important spiritual and symbolic value and meaning there. In verse 25, it says, Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. And I'm always amazed when I read through something like this, or like last time we talked about Jacob's ladder, how often there is just a very small little paragraph or a couple of lines, and there is so much information embedded into that. And I just find it really interesting, and this case is like that too, that there's just not much information, not a lot of words, just a little paragraph here basically, but there's a lot packed into this that is interesting to look at. So Jacob is left alone now, and sometimes we have to get alone. I think often it's a good idea to get alone and get in the quiet where you can think and not only pray, but commune with your own soul, like David talked about doing. And it says, a man wrestled with him until the break of day. So it calls this person a man. Often we hear people talk about Jacob wrestling with the angel, but it doesn't actually say that here. It says he's wrestling with a man. But that's the benefit of looking at a number of different passages, because if we turn over to the book of Hosea, for example, it does use that term angel, and that's in Hosea chapter 12. It says in Hosea 12 verse 3, he took his brother by the heel in the womb, and by his strength he had power with God. Okay, so that's talking about even before they're born, when Jacob is struggling for that birthright and blessing with his arch enemy and with his opposite force, Esau. Yea, he prevailed over the angel, verse 4, had power over the angel and prevailed. He wept and made supplication unto him. He found him in Bethel, and there he spake with us. And spake with us. Bethel means house of God. And so it's interesting because we talked about that last time, about where the house of God at the place where Jacob saw the ladder descend in his dream, that this is none other than the abode or house of God, and this is none other than the gate or the portal of the heavens. And so Hosea says that this was an angel that Jacob was wrestling with. And he wrestled with him until the break of dawn, it says in verse 25. When he perceived that he could not overcome him, that is, the angel couldn't overcome him, he struck the socket of his hip, so that Jacob's hip socket was dislocated as he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for the dawn has broken. It's another one of those things, just that I think it's good to pause and say, why is that relevant? Why does it make reference to the dawn twice within a couple of lines there? It must be important. It must be relevant. And that's something that we don't, probably most people wouldn't pause and really think about that much, about why is this angel seemingly getting anxious about the time as dawn is getting close, and it's close to dawn, that he's like, I need to go because it's almost dawn. If you remember when we I don't think I discussed it this year, but in the Torah portion of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, when the two angels were sent to Sodom to destroy it, a similar thing goes on there, that these angels are trying to get Lot and his family out of Sodom, and they are dragging their feet and taking their precious time. And the closer it gets to dawn, the more uneasy and anxious these angels seem to be. And I've wondered before if that might be perhaps where some of the vampire folklore comes from. I don't know, but apparently the the angels have shifts, and they have to be at certain places at certain times. And not to get off on it too much here, I've touched on it before, how time is relative, and the time that it happens to be in our realm now is not necessarily the clock or the clock that the angels are on or in this other realm. I'm speaking to you from Central Standard Time. You may be in another time zone. It appears that the angels are in a different time zone than the earth people. And just want to mention that. But also, they're also seeming, that the earth time is important too. And for whatever reason, many of them, probably depending upon their function, need to be finished with what they're doing before dawn arrives. And so we pick it up here. And so Jacob is wrestling with the man that Hosea calls the angel. And he said, I won't let you go unless you bless me. Jacob tells the angel, I won't let you go unless you bless me. And he said to him, what is your name? The angel asked him, what is your name? This is so amazing, when you really focus in and think about this. And what is your name? Jacob said, I won't let you go until you bless me. He said, what is your name? Doesn't that seem like, what does that have to do with anything, really? But it does. And Jacob replied, Jacob, Yaakov, which remember means hand on the heel. Before he was born, he had his hand on his brother's heel, vying for that birthright and that blessing. He said, no longer will it be said that your name is Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with the divine and with man and have overcome. So that's what the meaning of Israel, or Yisrael, which also begins with the Yod, has to do with the Prince of El and struggling and overcoming with the divine and with mortals. Then Jacob inquired, and he said, divulge, if you please, your name. So the angel asked Jacob's name, and I'm sure I get the impression here that it became silent and still, and like when the angel asked him his name, that something shifted in Jacob's consciousness, and he saw himself with greater objectivity, I think, than he ever had before. When he said, what is your name? And he said, my name is Hand on the Hill. My name is Jacob. And he realized, he saw himself in what he had been trying to do his whole life and how he had been struggling. And the angel gives him this name, says your name is going to be Israel now. So he's actually going to be called Jacob and Israel in the future, sometimes back and forth. And then Jacob asked, he says he inquired, and he says, divulge, tell me your name, please. And he said, why do you inquire of my name? And he blessed him there. And this is really pretty cool. So he didn't say what his name was, or did he? On a plain level, it doesn't. Jacob asked his name, and then the guy, the man/angel, says, ask him a question. Why do you inquire about my name? And he blessed him. And let me pause there for a second. In a number of my commentaries, the rabbis, many of them say that this person that Jacob is wrestling with says that every nation, they believe every nation has like its national or guardian angel, like every country, every nation, but that Esau and Jacob are unique in that. And according to my commentary, it says that Israel doesn't need a mediator angel like the other nations do. Now, I disagree with that, and I think that the scriptures disagree with that. They say that Esau's guardian angel is none other than Satan himself, Hasatan. And they say that Hasatan is the equivalent, is the same thing, one and the same, with the angel of death and the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, which I haven't really talked about this year. I have in the past, but it's relevant to this whole struggle that Jacob is having. The evil inclination, or the Yetzer Hara, is, that proclivity to do wrong. That deserves much more explanation than I really can get into right now, but I just wanted to explain to you that is a prominent, prevalent view, that the person that Jacob is wrestling with is Satan. I don't agree with that myself, for a number of reasons. For one thing, it says that, okay, in order for that to be so, then, Satan gives Jacob the name Israel, which I find a lot of problems with. And he blesses him, it says. Whoever this is, this man angel, blesses Jacob after he asks his name. And that, to me, doesn't make sense. I mean, even like I believe it's the book of James, and I believe other passages would echo this and confirm it. It says, can bitter waters come out of a good well, or does somebody gather figs from a thorn tree, from a thorn bush? That, in other words, corrupt words shouldn't come out of a clean source or clean well. And I don't think that good or blessing could come from Satan. That just doesn't make any sense to me. So I'll tell you what my view is. As we've looked here, the book of Hosea identifies this person as an angel, a Malach. And Jacob does inquire about his name, and he doesn't directly answer here so much. But there is a passage that almost mirrors this, if you look at it in the book of Judges, and I believe that is going to be Judges chapter 13, where we're looking at the parents of Samson. And we're looking at Samson's mother has an encounter with an angel, and they don't know it's an angel at first, and then he appears on another day, and she goes and gets her husband Manoah, and they have a conversation with this angel that later goes up into a sacrifice, ascends up into the sacrifice. But they ask him his name. They said, what is your name, sir, that when the child is born, we believe what you're telling us here, that we may do you honor. So they were apparently wanting to name the child after this man that is actually an angel, and they don't know it. And he says, why do you ask my name, seeing it is secret? Is the way most of my translations render that. Why do you ask my name, seeing it's secret? And that's a really interesting thing. Very similar to what happened here. Why do you ask my name? Well, this other angel says, why do you ask my name? Only he says, seeing it's secret. But if you look up the word secret there, and I don't have this information in front of me at the moment, I believe it is the word pala. I believe that's right. It's directly related to the word pele, which, by the way, is every letter can be spelled out as a word. And so, like the first letter, Aleph, is spelled with the Aleph, the Lamed, and the Pei, the Aleph. And so it has a gematria, like the single letter Aleph has a gematria or numerical value of 1, but if you spell out Aleph as a word, Aleph Lamed Pei, Pei Sophit, it has numerical value of 1, 1, 1. And so this relates to the idea of God as master and sovereign in many respects. Aleph has a numerical value of 1 or 1,000. God is 1. Or if you spell it out, you end up with 1, 1, 1. Now, God has a aspect of him as sort of like the mems. The Hebrew letter mem, the 13th letter, has its form, its open form, that if it's beginning a word or in the middle of a word, and then it has a final form, if it's at the end of the word. So like the word mayim, water, starts with the regular open mem. It's got an opening at the bottom, and the final mem is closed. And so this represents a lot of things, but one of the things it represents is that there are things that are revealed and open, and there are things that are closed and concealed. There are things that we can know about God from his creation, that he reveals about his character and his attributes. And in his word and his commandments, there are many things that we can learn and understand about him. But also there is always an awful, I don't know how you would say it, but there's a lot of him that is concealed too and hidden. And so if we spell out the word Aleph, spell out the letter Aleph as a word, Aleph Lamed Pei, we can flip that around backwards, and it is going to be the word Pele. Pele means like a wonder or something secret or hidden. Now, it's interesting, there's a passage that many of you are familiar with in the book of Isaiah chapter 9, very famous messianic passage, and it says, "For unto us a child is given, unto us a son is born. Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. And his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, Almighty God, Everlasting Father." I think I've got that right. Pretty close to that. So, and his name shall be called Wonderful. Okay, so a lot of us have heard that. When you look up that word wonderful there, it is going to be a related word. It is going to connect directly to this word Pele and Pala. Essentially, like with the angel speaking to Manoah and his wife, Samson's parents, they say, "What is your name?" And he says, "Why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful?" Or another way we could do that is go back to the Isaiah chapter 9 passage and say, "Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and his name shall be called Secret." His name shall be called Wonderful, a marvel, secret. Okay? So there's a lot of things that are that begin to connect. Let me touch a little bit on a couple of other things right quickly. In the book of, because I know a lot of you are very familiar with the passage, the confrontation that Elijah has at Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal. And there were how many of them? 400. That number 400 again. 400 prophets of Baal and 450 prophets of the groves. And so he repairs, it says in verse 31, "And Elijah took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, unto whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be your name." Now that is going to directly relate. Elijah took 12 stones, and last time I talked about, last time or the time before, about Jacob when he had the dream of the ladder. He arranged stones around his heads, and the rabbis say that there were 12 stones that ultimately turned into one unified stone. But it says, Elijah says, and Elijah took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, unto whom, calls him Jacob, unto whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be thy name. Okay, now that is what we've been discussing here, this situation in which someone came to Jacob saying, Israel shall be your name. Notice the vernacular that Elijah uses. So Genesis says that Jacob wrestled with a man. Hosea says it was an angel. And in 1 Kings 18:31, Elijah says, unto whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be thy name. Who is the word? In the beginning was the word. We know that the word became flesh, and the word was called Yeshua, salvation. So Genesis said it was a man. Hosea tells us it was an angel. And Elijah in 1 Kings says, the word came unto Jacob, saying, Israel shall be your name. Now, one other thing, it says that once Jacob's name was changed here, and his walk was changed because this angel touched his hip socket and changed the way his walk, his halakah. And Jacob asked his name. He says, why do you ask my name? And he blessed him there. So Jacob called the name of the place Pineal. For I have seen the divine face to face, yet my life was spared. And so the word for face is pene, and often one of the words for God is El. So face, God. I've seen the divine face to face. So calls him a man, calls him an angel, and now Jacob says, I've seen the divine face to face and lived. And I'm sorry, it doesn't make any sense for this to be Satan in any respect. And I think that the overwhelming bulk of the evidence when we look will show that this is the Messiah that Jacob is wrestling with here. And it says that Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen the divine face to face, yet my life was spared. The sun rose for him as he passed Penuel, and he was limping on his hip. Isn't that really strange? So in verse 31, Jacob named the place Peniel, and in the next verse, it spells the place differently. The vav is missing. I'm sorry. Let me say that again. Peniel originally is spelled with a yud, and then it changes to a vav. And we've been talking about the vav in a number of these textual anomalies lately. And so I think this is a really interesting thing when you look at it and you think on it on multiple levels. And I've talked to, and I've done some presentations in the past. It's been a while, but sometime do some searching on the internet, get on Google or something, and type in pineal gland. I've heard it pronounced different ways. Pineal gland. It is a very small gland in between the two hemispheres of the cerebrum, the brain. It's a little bitty place in between those two things, in between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere of the brain or the mind. And who is it? Rene Descartes, the philosopher. He said that the pineal gland was the seat of the soul. And I remember doing some, in one of my presentations on the ministry of Moses and Elijah, the two witnesses, I remember discussing the subject of the pineal gland and Jacob having this encounter when he has this face-to-face interaction with someone who changed his destiny but he also has a face encounter with himself and comes to know himself at this place that he called Pineal, meaning face of God, for I've seen the divine face to face. His name had just been changed to Israel, because you've striven with the divine and with man and prevailed. And then he just has this major revelation, and he called the name of the place Pineal, for I have seen the divine face to face, yet my life was spared. And then it spells it Pineal. Instead of using the Yud, it changes to a Vav. And by the way, both of those letters, the Yud is the first name of the divine name of God in the Tetragrammaton, and the Vav is the third letter in the name. I'm going to pause there. I wanted to get into what I think this angel's name is, and add a little more depth to that, but I'm going to go ahead and end here for today. And I hope you've enjoyed the discussion. If you have any questions or comments, comment down below, or feel free to email me. And hope you've enjoyed the discussion today. Look forward to seeing you again next time. Goodbye.